What's up, guys? Dylan Rush with Cage Side Press, joined today by the head coach at Xtreme Couture MMA, one of the best gyms in the world, Mr. Dennis Davis. How you doing, Dennis?
Doing good.
So I read that you are a 6-time MMA champion. We were just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into mixed martial arts originally? Were you a young child?
Yeah, I was 14 when I seen UFC 2,
Mm-hmm.
and actually the first fight I ever seen was Pat Smith when he was elbowing that guy up, if you remember that fight, and I was like, wow, I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so where I lived, there was
Where did you live?
Roseburg, Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah, Oregon. So I wanted to do that, but where I lived, this was way before anything. I mean, there wasn't gyms, so there was a kung fu school in town. So I went to the kung fu school, started doing that. Actually got a black belt in kung fu, but they just hand those shits out, and then a lot of it's just show and it doesn't really you can't really use it, right? But my kung fu teacher had a friend, and his name was Tim Cartmill, and he was a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and he was in California. And I mean, this is back in 95, at this time.
Before my time.
Yeah, so he ended up coming up, and he also was a kung fu guy, but he was trained in jiu-jitsu. And he's like, he did a kung fu seminar, and then after he's like, yeah, I've been doing this jiu-jitsu stuff. Obviously, I'd seen Royce Gracie. He'd won the first couple things with jiu-jitsu, and I was like, oh, I want to check it out. So he started, he would basically showed a bunch of stuff. We filmed it all on like an old school camera, and then me and all the kung fu guys, when he went back to California, we just would rep everything he showed us. So at that time we probably had like 4 moves or something like that, right? But we just got really good at like, hey, here's a key lock, and we repped that 1,000 times. And then 6 months later he'd come up and here's a couple more moves. And so my first few years of jiu-jitsu was kind of doing it that way. And then I graduated high school, and then I was doing my research, and in Oregon there was one school that had jiu-jitsu, and it was Straight Blast Gym, which is the original Straight Blast Gym, and that guy his name is Matt Thornton, and he's the guy that gave John Kaepernick his black belt, so Connor's coach, his black belt, and that's where the Straight Blast Gym Ireland is the affiliation under that gym from Oregon, the original Straight Blast Gym. So I was training with that guy, and one of his students was Robert Follis, who was a big-time MMA coach, and then Robert Follis was training, and then Follis was starting to teach more and more classes. So it was like Matt was there, he would teach classes, but he was gone doing seminars and stuff like that. So Follis started teaching a lot, and I was doing jiu-jitsu with Follis, and then Follis was trained with Randy and Matt Lindland and Chell Sonnen. And he was like, hey, I'm gonna go over with these guys, and we're gonna open this gym called Team Quest. He's like, if you want to come with. So basically I was like, well, heck yeah. I mean, you pretty much took over as my coach. Yeah. And we're over here, and the only guy I'd even heard of at that time, like, I didn't know who Dan Henderson was or Chell Sonnen. I knew Randy because he'd had a few fights in UFC at the time. So I'm like, whoa, that's a UFC guy. Like, I want to go over there. I'm going to train with you guys. So I went over there and started training. Basically, it was Chell Sonnen, Randy, Dan Henderson, Evan Tanner, Chell Sonnen, Nick
Have you done any striking at this point? Just the
kung fu shit. At the Straight Blast Gym, we did a little bit. It was more like JKD, because they were trying to put in like the Bruce Lee, JKD shit. So a little bit, but not really, right? So then I went over there, and it basically was just those guys and me. And so every day they were just kicking the shit out of me, but every day it was like a private lesson with one of the best grapplers in the world. And they're like, hey, this is how you do a single leg. Hey, kid. And eventually I thought they were probably thinking they're just going to beat my ass, and I'd stop showing up, kept showing up, and they started helping me more and more. Hey, here's a collar tie, here's this. And then my grappling, especially my wrestling, shot out the roof. And then I was there probably only a few months, and then it was like, hey, we got this local show coming to town, there's going to be fights. You want to fight? I was like, heck yeah, sign me up. That was that.
The rest is history. Mm-hmm. 6 championships later.
Yeah. 6 championships later. Eventually, so that promotion, it was called the FCFF. It's actually still going.
Really?
Yep, up in the Northwest. And Chell Sonnen actually is the owner of it.
Really?
Yeah, he started
wow,
him and
cool.
this other guy, Kevin Keeney. And So that's still going. I was their champion there, and then another show came up in the Northwest called Sport Fight, and that was actually one of the bigger shows. I mean, tons of UFC guys. Sean Shirk fought on it. Jeremy Horn fought on it. Paul Daly fought on it. I mean,
I love Paul Daly.
Yeah, I mean, there was a ton. So like, the level of that show was very high level, and it was a big show. I mean, we had a show at the, I don't know what it's called now, but the Rose Garden, which is where the Blazers play, and you know.
Oh, that's cool.
I think there was probably about 8,000 or 9,000 people in the audience.
Yeah.
So like, a pretty good show. I would say it was.
And the sport wasn't even nearly as big back then, so 8,000 or 9,000, that's a lot of people.
It was a big show, yeah. And I would think that show was probably about like a Bellator-ish level at that time. And so I was their 4-time champ.
Wow.
On that one. So
what weight class you fight at?
That one I was at 55, but I fought at 45, 55, 70.
Wow.
But should have never fought at 70. Shouldn't even probably fought at 55, because at that time, I mean, I was walking at like 153. It was just, there was no lower weight classes.
Yeah.
So like when I was at my peak prime, I mean, 55 was about the lowest. And then the reason I was fighting fights at 70, because the UFC at that time only had fights at 70. So I was taking fights at 70, thinking like, okay, well, I can win this, then maybe I can get in the UFC. And then like, I actually tried out for season 2 of The Ultimate Fighter, got an interview, and Dana just came in, and I had like boots on and a big jacket, and Dana was like, he's like, you're too small. You're just too small. And I was like, all right, you know. So yeah.
So fast forward a little bit, how did you end up coming to coaching and Xtreme Couture in Las Vegas?
So Randy actually opened this gym up. I'd actually moved to Vegas before Randy, and I had opened up my own gym with Rico. Well, I was going to open it with Rico Rodriguez, who was an old UFC heavyweight champ back in the day. He talked me into moving to Vegas, and then we were going to open a gym, and then he ended up taking off for some girl, and then so I was kind of here. So I opened it up with another guy, but then I lost my title. And I was like, man, what am I doing? Am I trying to make money, or am I trying to fight?
Yeah.
And I mean, at this time, there was no money in fighting, so I didn't really care about money. I was like, I just want to fight.
Yeah.
So I shut my gym down. They actually called me up for season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter and was like, hey, we want you to do The Ultimate Fighter. You're gonna be on that. Get ready. So I packed all my stuff. I moved back up to Oregon. I was going to do that. Come to find out, they called me like the week of taping. No, we had you as basically an alternate. You're not going to be on the show. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So then, about that time, Randy called me up. He opened an Xtreme Couture here, and he opened up one in Washington. He called me to basically run his gym up in Washington, because we obviously had a relationship, trained with each other for quite a while. And I told him, I was like, well, I don't want to run a gym, I don't want to coach at a gym, I just want to fight right now. And he's like, well, I just opened the one in Vegas. We have this guy, Gray Maynard, never heard of him. We got this guy, Tyson Griffin, who's coming. I'd heard of Tyson because Tyson had just beat like Uriah Faber, and that kind of blew his name up. So I was like, oh, I got a guy my size that I can train with who just beat Faber. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. So I was like, yep, I'm in. So I packed up what little stuff I had. I was here a week later, and basically that was right when the gym opened up. And then Randy basically, he had a thing. He's like, hey, if guys coach per classes, you can get paid. And then other guys, if you teach at least 5 classes, you don't have to pay for membership and all that stuff. And so I came in, just started teaching a couple basic like jiu-jitsu classes, and then was still fighting. So I was doing that part-time, and then once I started the gym, I didn't think was that great. At first it was good. We had a bunch of good guys, but I don't feel the coaching was that great at Xtreme, because it was basically, hey, glove up, come in, spar, okay. So everyone was tough, but there was real no growth. And I think my career kind of like plateaued and kind of even started to fall off. And I started losing a couple fights, and I was like, man, what's going on here? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna retire from fighting. And at the time, the amateur team was not doing well. At the year, Randy came to me and was like, hey, would you want to take over the amateur team? And I'd already said I wanted to help those guys out because at that time the amateur team had 2 wins, 16 losses on the year. Not good. Not good at all.
Not good at all.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to start helping out with the amateur team. Started doing that, and then my first year, I think we went on a 15-fight win streak, won 6 titles, and then the 5 years the gym had been open at this time, we'd won 1 title. So I started having success, and I thought I was having success because some of those guys that had losing records on the amateur team, like there was one guy who was 0-4. I ended up taking him to 4-4, and then he ended up like, hey, that was good. And I had another guy who was like 2-7, and he ended up winning, I can't remember exactly how many row, and then he won the Tough Enough Lightweight Championship.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, I didn't like kick everyone out and just brought in new guys.
Yeah.
I built those guys up who weren't very good, and they ended up becoming good. So I think because some of the pros at that time was seeing, oh, these guys are actually getting better and they're actually getting coached instead of just showing up and sparring, a couple pros were starting to jump into amateur practice. So one day, Randy was like, hey, I need to see you in my office. And I was like, oh, shit, what I do? Hopefully he doesn't whoop me up or anything. And he was like, hey, would you want to take over as the pro coach? I was like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. So that day, basically, I came in, which was kind of hard. The transition was kind of hard because, like, a few months earlier, I was a teammate.
Yeah.
Right? And then
now you're the pro.
Yeah, so it was, I think at first it was kind of hard to get guys because it was like, here's a UFC guy, here's a UFC guy, boom, and now, hey, you've got to listen to me and do this. So at first it was kind of like a rough patch. And then, like, dude, my first day I came in, it was like Randy, Belford, I think Wanderlei Silva, Forrest Griffin, right? And then I'm like, all right, guys, like, what? In my head, I'm like, fuck, what am I going to show these guys?
Yeah.
Right? But, yeah, I started, boom, putting them in line, and then
Earn the respect. Right?
Earn the respect, and then I knew, like, myself, it was the way I wanted this team to be, I couldn't do it myself. No guy can do it yourself, right? So I started, like, trying to think of, like, okay, what can we do to get more coaches in to help me out? And at that time, Robert Fallis, who was my old coach at Team Quest and Randy's coach, he was kind of at a spot where he was talking about moving down. He was going to train some more combat type stuff to some cops and stuff like that. And so I was like, yo, what do we got to do to get you to join the gym with us? And he was like, it's like, well, this is the amount of money I need to make it work. The gym couldn't afford it, so I actually was like, take some of my money that I was earning. I basically cut my pay to bring him on, right? Which, thinking about it, is a little wild to, like, hey, I'm going to cut myself out short and then bring on a guy who basically was my coach and would be competition, right? Which is how most people would look at it. For me, it wasn't about competition. It was like, here's a dude who's going to take our level to a next. Yeah. Right? I mean, he's helped me as a fighter, but I knew he could also help me with my coaching as well, right? So we got him on, and then, of course, he was a great leader, and he all of a sudden, some people, Misha Tate moved down here, but, you know, and people started joining it up, and
was it always this location right here?
Always this location, yeah. And then so the team started slowly building, right? Because, again, if it was just me, and say I had somebody who was going to be fighting, then I'm gone. Now who's
coaching? Now
guys are just sparring, right? So it was kind of good. And then about that time, Nixick started coming up. Nixick used to be a guy that was in my jiu-jitsu classes and that I was coaching, and then he was slowly, boom, learning the game, and his skill set started slowly coming up as well, with me and Fallis and the guys basically just helping each other out. And then and then obviously stuff with Fallis happened, and he was out, and then boom, Eric. That's when Eric started bossing them up, and yeah, that's kind of where we're at now.
You got Nixick, you got, of course, you, Dennis Davis, Dewey Cooper, Nate Pettit, all these guys, of course, so many more. Do you feel that the coaching now, you talked about there were times where it wasn't as great. Do you feel like the coaching now here at XC is better than it ever has been?
Oh, it is not even close. Yeah, not even close. I mean, like when I was here, we had a couple coaches, you know, but I think some of those coaches, like, again, if he wasn't in the UFC, he wasn't really getting looked at too much, right? And then, yeah, and then again, I don't feel at that time there was a lot of coaching. I think it was a lot of more clock management, right? Of like, all right, guys, hey, big gloves today, small gloves. Here's a clock. We're sparring, right? And I wasn't really getting corrected on any mistakes that I was making or anything. At least my personal opinion. Now, I mean, that's what's great about it. We got all these great coaches, and again, if it was myself or just me and Nick Sick, there's no way we'd be running where we're at without all the other coaches, right? Because again, we would be gone every weekend. We're gone. It's hard enough with all the coaches, right? Because I have my group of guys, Eric has his guys, Nate has his guys, Eddie has his guys, and it's hard enough for us to be gone, and because again, I might have a guy and then I have to be gone and I have another guy in camp. And it's like, hey, can one of you guys kind of help this guy for a week while I'm gone? And we try to jump in and help each other out as much as we can. And and so right now I think it's by far the best.
And it shows you guys have what, the last fight night, Strickland, Pune, and Ige. The last 3 fights, co-main and main, are all guys from XC, so it's definitely showing a lot of champions. Cameraman's telling me we got to wrap it up, which is okay, because I'm sure this will just be the first of many interviews, hopefully, I do with you. So I always finish my interviews with this question. When it's all said and done, coaching, training, fighting, whatever it may be, what do you want people to remember most about Dennis Davis?
Ooh, that's a hard one to think. I want them to think like someone who gave, cared for his guys, a guy who built guys from scratch to top. Because that's one thing that I really enjoy, and you see a lot of guys I coach. I've coached them from the amateur all the way up. Day one guys. Yeah. Day one, all the way to the top.
That's awesome.
And you don't see a lot of guys do that, right? You don't see guys from scratch all the way up. So I would like guys to remember me that way. Be like, oh, this guy was a complete package of, he can build a guy from nothing to the highest level.
I think that would be a great way to be remembered. I appreciate it, man.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dennis Davis. It's a wrap.